Okay, we're going to do a code along, which this is going to be on our continued learning of Express.js. Okay, and so yesterday we introduced Express. Today we're going to continue through a demonstration project. And so this project is going to be a project that we start kind of here, phase one, and whatever, this is the idea. The idea is a retro or old school Amazon.com. And so throughout the course of this semester, I'm going to be building kind of the Amazon.com 1.0, where they just sold books. Not even, I kind of just did a Google search for like an old school, what did Amazon.com look like? Hopefully we can make it look a little nicer than this. But yeah, that's what they did. They sold books. And so we're going to make a full stack web application where we sell books as if we're building Amazon.com. You and I are the new Jeff Bezos in 2023. And so to do this, we're gonna build up a full stack web application. We're going to start with Node and Express. Let's go ahead and just start with a new folder. I'm just going to say retro Amazon and go inside of that. And in here, I'm going to say backend and a new folder for the front end. We're actually going to divide this out into two projects. Today we're going to start the back end. So I'm just going to open up the backend folder in VS Code. Okay, so here's the backend folder. And let's go into our terminal and run the npm init command like we learned yesterday. Okay, now as I'm going through with this, keep in mind this is going to create a package.json file which we can edit later. So these answers are not permanent. We could always change this. I'm just going to say retro Amazon backend would be my package name. Again, can always change that. Oh, it doesn't like it. Okay, retro Amazon backend. Let's try that. Okay, version 1. Description. We are building a mock Amazon.com from 1995. Approximately 1995. Entry point, I'm just going to say server.js is my entry point. It's just a preference, it's the backend server, so we'll call the JavaScript file server.js. I'm going to leave the test command blank. Get repository, I'll leave blank. Keywords, I'll leave blank. Author, license. Is this okay? Yes. All right. Let's go ahead and build the Git repo for this. And I may tweak something here. So let's go to github.com now. github.com. Really, I should have started here. Is on Amazon.com, on github.com. I'm going to create a new repo. So I'm going to click this drop down arrow. I would ask that you do the same. And no template is good. I've got some different accounts here, so I'm going to choose my account, and I'm just going to call this retro Amazon backend. I'll go ahead and make this public. I'm going to add a README. The get ignore is node. The license is MIT. This will set master as the default branch. That's good with me. Okay, is everyone good to go with the settings on here? Raise your hand if you're not. Click on create repository. Okay, I like this better. Now we've got a repo, Retro Amazon backend. Let's go ahead and copy that URL or URI for the Git repo. And let's go ahead and delete the word backend, everything inside of it. I'm going to hold down Shift and click delete. Hold on, let's close it first. Close it out of Visual Studio Code. Hold down Shift delete. And yes. Now, right click and clone it. Now you might not have Tortoise Git, you might have a different software, so use your cloning software of choice. My preference is Tortoise Git. I can just right click clone. And notice it will create a folder called Retro Amazon Backend. And that makes me happier that I'm starting this folder off as a Git repo. If you have hidden files and folders, you'll notice a hidden folder here with .git. That means you know that this is a Git repo and that it's in fact working. Okay, so let's go ahead and open this folder up in VS Code. And now, let's go to the terminal. And now we can do an npm init. Okay, now let's go ahead and run the npm init and let's answer those same questions like we did last time. Retro Amazon Backend, I'm cool with that package name. Version 1, description, we are building a mock, or I would even say a full stack, a MERN full stack, mock Amazon.com from the early days. We're just going to be building it with Bootstrap. Server.js is our entry point. Test command is empty. Git repo. Now I wonder if I still have that on my clipboard. So I just right click in the terminal and it pastes my URL. Keywords, we'll just put in some keywords. Class project, fun class project, how about that? Author, my name. License, MIT. Yes. So there's my package JSON. Again, nothing that we can't change later. Has everyone got their package JSON created? All right, now we did say that the entry point was server.js. And we did say that we're going to install Express. Remember the installation command for Express? npm.js.com. Search for Express. You don't actually have to follow this step because the command is crazy easy. If you click on Express, npm I is short for install Express. npm I Express. So let's just type that in, npm I Express. Notice I'm going to close my package.json because I am modifying that file. Okay, so when I'm modifying a file through a terminal, I'm just going to make sure that that file itself is closed. I'm going to go ahead and install Express. And now if I open that back up, notice node modules is there. If I open up my package JSON, I now have a dependency of Express. So that's good. So let's go to server.js. And we're going to, oh, wait a minute. We also need to add a type of module. So after the main key on line 5 for me, there's a comma. I'm going to add a type of module. So I added line 6. I'm going to save that package JSON. That's going to allow us to use the newer import-export syntax of ES modules. Our 2015, I think import-export, yeah, 2015 or so. All right, let's code up a server.js Express server, bare bones, right? So we're going to start by importing Express from Express. Const app equals Express. All right, so we're bringing in this method from this package. The method is called Express. We then run that method and make our web server. Then we have to do two things. We have to make a route and we have to listen on a port. So default route is with app.get here. And we're going to respond with hello world. Listen on port 3003. And I'm going to change this console log to be backticks. Server is listening on HTTP colon. That way we can get a link, right, that we can click. I guess just to be a little different, hello from Amazon.com. Okay, now, to test it, we simply need to run the server.js. The way that we're going to run it, at least to start, is node server.js. And it says server is listening on port 3000. I can hold down control, click this link, and it should pop open in a browser on the home route where it says, with a response from the server to my client, hello from Amazon.com. Now, we're in development, and very quickly I don't want to just start and stop my server every time I make a change. So I'm going to leverage NodeMon that we installed yesterday. The way that I'm going to leverage NodeMon is I'm going to go into my package JSON, into the scripts object, and I'm going to put a comma after the test, and I'm going to say in quote start colon, I'm going to say node server.js. So that's one script that I can create called the start script. I'm going to create a start-dev script which runs NodeMon. Okay, so I added these 2 lines of code to make 2 different scripts. To keep in mind, to run these scripts, I have to run the npm command. So it's npm run and then the name of your script. So in my development environment, I'm just going to run the start dev script. Okay, whereas in production, you just run the start script. So if I were to type in npm in my terminal after this, I'm going to say run, which is going to run a script, start-dev. If you got installed NodeMon yesterday properly, NodeMon should boot up. And now we don't have to manually reboot our server every time. Okay, so keep in mind on our default route here, we got a request object. We're not using that object, and we have a response. Response is from the server responding back to the client, and all we're doing is we're just using the send message to send a string of text, and so that's why that string of text shows up in the browser, right? So res send, you know, is going to basically, the content there is going to be usable in the browser, versus a console log. That's why this is our console. Why we're getting a console log message in our terminal. So you know these two, you know, these two JavaScript lines of code kind of output different locations. So this is kind of our bare bones Express app, just to get it up and running. We've got a script now for NodeMon. Let's make an array of books. Okay, so here inside of my server.js, const books equals array of objects. And I'll have object 1, and I'll have object 2, object 3. Okay, so I'll have maybe 3 books. Or something. Now, if you want to, you know, we've kind of learned the site Makaru. And maybe if I sign in here, maybe I don't even have to sign in, but go ahead and go to makaru.com. And let's see if I can sign in with Google maybe. Okay, so I'm signed in with Google. You guys should have. You don't need to sign in? No. So let's go to schemas. Let's see, data sets. Okay, this is what I'm looking for. So I'm going to have an underscore ID field. And when I'm choosing a type, I was hoping there would be a book type. Yes?
You can, underneath the field name types and options, there's generate fields using AI. You could just type in to generate one made for.
Under what now?
Scroll down a little bit.
Uh-huh.
Generate fields using
Uh-huh.
AI.
So if I say book.
Sure, you can update the number of fields.
And
it's an or thing.
Okay, so if I hit book.
You would type book and then replace existing fields. Like for instance, I did it and I got title, author, publication date.
Okay. Interesting. So again, generate fields.
And because you had 10, it added a whole lot more, like in the publisher, the price, the language, the page count, description. But if you just do 3, it'll only give you the basic 3 fields that a book could have.
Okay, so let's see. So I just want like maybe a few less fields, right? So maybe not 10. So maybe say 4 fields. But I want an ID field. Title, author, date, genre, and I want an ID. title, full name, date, genre, and ID. Sure, we'll choose a GUID.
The basic one is row number. You just want to do row number.
I'd say if you type in number, there's a bunch of options.
Row number.
Yeah, row number seems to be.
I'm fine with that. So let's see, row number. So title, author, date, genre, and ID. And I don't need this many rows, so I'm gonna say 5 books in JSON format inside of an array. Your mileage may vary. It doesn't have to be these exact fields. But I'll tell you what I'll do so that you do have the exact same. I'll just paste my code in Discord. You can copy it. Okay, so if I click on generate data, and I'll call this books.json. And open this with Notepad. Okay, we get some books. So I'm going to copy that, and I'll paste it in Discord. Why are my titles?
Because it's doing a title.
Oh. I don't want my title to be that. I want my title to be. So I'm going to change my type. Let me delete that. Delete message. What would I do here?
There's some options for name.
There's stock name.
There's app names as well.
Well, a stock
You can
name.
do movie name.
Yeah, you can do movie titles.
Okay, let's do movie title. I'm good with that. Good call. Thank you. So now if I refactor my thing to movie title, author is a name, date, genre, and an ID. Now let's generate the data called books.json and open it up and pull it in a Notepad.
It's the same one.
I know.
You don't have to download it, you just hit preview.
Now we got something a little different. And so I paste that into Discord, so you should be able to copy and replace all of this with that. So if I refactor this a little bit,
Can you make it import a JSON file?
you could.
Look, you can also just do generate preview and just copy it so you don't need to download the JSON file.
Yes.
All right, now we have our seed data, right? That's what we would call that. Now, in the real world, we're going to store this in a database, but we haven't learned database yet, so we're going to get there. But the first thing I would do is I would make a route to get all the books. So keep in mind, we're putting our routes inside of server.js. At the end of today, we're going to refactor this and put our routes somewhere else. But let's make a route to get all the books. I'm going to put this at /books, app.get Um, so here you can see we're sending back a JSON piece of data, which you can have an array. It's a valid parent of a JSON file is an array. The seed, the object, or the array, excuse me, the array called books. Yes.
Is there a way, if we were to remove the JSON file that was downloaded into the folder?
There is a way, yes.
Oh, okay. Use your way to just copy and paste it.
I would use that fetch API. Literally, we just did that a couple days ago. Okay. So, to test this, we would go into localhost. So this should be booted. I can click it. And I put it at /books, and we get our data back. It was called JSON Parser, the extension. If I look at my extensions here on Chrome, I've got this JSON formatter. Makes JSON easy to read. Okay, so CRUD operations, right? Very good projects, right? CRUD, right? So a get all books is a read operation. Of course, we can read one book, right? If you don't want to get all the books, of course, you could read one book. And maybe we could read by the ID. Right, or by the title, right? So you could read by different values. If you know how to do read by one, you could certainly learn how to do read by the other. So let's just do read by ID. How about that? How about let's get a book by the ID. App.get. One thing that I struggle with is like the naming. Should this be books or book? Well, it's singular, so I tend to think book. Now, ID it's got a colon in front of it, right? Because that's a parameter variable, right? So we're going to allow the end user to provide the ID. Comma, we've got a request object, a response object, an arrow function, and let's put our closing parenthesis here. Okay, so this is another route. We're creating another route to get a book by the ID. So in that, when you provide /book /1, this should just return that one book. Now yesterday, something else, res.status. Remember we learned a little bit about status codes yesterday? So we could say res.status.json. So that's just a little extra there to say, hey, that this was a successful response. So what we need to do then is we need to read this ID out of the request object. Remember, request is coming from the client. And we did this a little bit yesterday, where we're using the request object. There's a params property, and then this ID variable matches the name of the ID right here. Oops, I'm not inside of my curlies. I got to put my closing curly right here. Okay, so maybe for now, I'm just going to do a res dot status 200 dot send. I'm just going to send the ID back, right? So what I want to do is I want to send the ID in via the params, and I'm just going to get the ID back out. Yes.
So we need the underscore ID, since that's what we limited in our.
We'll get there because we're not referencing that yet. This ID is just a number coming in from the client. Underscore ID is what we named it inside of our, right? So there's two different variables at this point. We're getting to the point where it makes sense to use Postman now instead of the browser, I think. So let's get a little more practice with Postman. Let's boot up Postman. And go ahead and close the requests from yesterday, like close all of this from yesterday. If it asks you to save changes, you can save changes, right? And just get to kind of where your workspace looks like this. And I would start a new collection. So this little plus button right here to create a new collection. And I'll call this old retro Amazon. And then my first, if you click the collection and you click add request. And so this will be default route, which I had http://localhost:3003, and I should get a string of text back that says hello from Amazon.com. So I just tested my default route like we did in the browser. So let's test our next route. So I'm going to click on the collection and add another request. It is a GET request. Notice the request types over here. It's at port 3003 HTTP localhost / localhost 3003 / what do we call it? Books. Okay, and we get our books back. If you click right here, see where my mouse is, where it says new request. I'll just call this get all books. So my request is called get all books. Control S to save it, or just click off of it. So I've got a default route and I've got a get all books. And close this collection tab. And I'm going to create one more because we just created our third route. And I'm going to generate another request. And this one will be get book by ID. HTTP / localhost 3003. We put it at book singular, and we can just put the number 3. Keep in mind, I'm just sending the data to the server. The variable is the number 3, and I'm asking the server just send back the number 3. So if this works, we send the number 3, we get back the number 3. We send the number 2, we get back the number 2. Yes. So the question is, hey, if you didn't add the colon, would that not have worked? Yes, the colon says, hey, make this a variable, right? This is called a parameter variable. A parameter is, something you pass in. Okay, so this is where we're at right now, where we've got these 3 Postman requests. Okay, I'm gonna send you guys on your morning break. Before you go on break, make sure that you're here. Make sure that you're here and you're caught up. And so we left off here where we were actually extracting an ID out of a request object parameter. Okay, and then we're just sending that ID back. Well, we need to actually use that ID and kind of query it against our array. So instead of just sending back the ID, let's make a book object and run a find method, which this is an array method, right? So last semester, I know it seems like forever ago, but we learned very common and useful methods that belong to arrays. And so here we can run a find method. We can loop through our array of objects and say, hey, for every book, I want you to return the value true. I want you to return that book when the underscore ID, Connor, that you asked about, the underscore ID matches the ID that we are extracting. Now, we're doing a double equal sign here. And so let's check this out. If I actually do a res.status200 send book. Yeah, James.
Why would you do a double instead of a triple?
Well, what's the difference?
Like value type?
Yeah, the types, the data types. And so the reason in my mind is that I'm not 100% sure if this is going to be a string or an int. Now I could convert it to an int, I could parse int, and then I would be 100% sure. But the reason I did 2 instead of 3 is I'm not sure at this point. Like I don't remember. I'm thinking because it's coming from a URL, that's going to be a string. So I'm thinking this ID is a string. And what is it in here? It is not a string. This is an int. So I'm thinking a triple equals would actually return false. Does that answer your question? Cool. So now let's go back and let's spit out the number 2. And you notice that I get the book back with the ID of 2. And so I would actually change this a little bit. I would do if book is truthy, if book, send back book, else, okay, and I'm going to send status 200. Otherwise, I'm going to res status 404 dot send book with an ID not found. Now I got an extra curly somewhere.
The ID from the request.
Oh, here we go, here we go.
is a string.
Here we go. So if this find method returns a value, we should get that data back. Otherwise, we should say book not found. So if I actually send a book number 21 over, we say book 21 not found. And notice I'm sending back a little bit of JSON here, which is, we're just sending back an object, which is fine. So it's coming back in an object instead. Connor, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm not getting that. I'm getting an internal server error.
Okay, let's take a look. Okay, so here's getting all the books. Here's getting a book by ID. What do we want to do next? How about update a book by the ID? Now, so far everything's been app.get, app.get. We've got 3 routes and they're all get routes. Okay, but now think about this. We're gonna select a book and then we're gonna let the user type in some fields and then send that data, post that data, as you could say, you could put it on a post. You could also put it on a put method. So updates, updates can use a put or a post. So those are two valid methods for providing an update. Now, in order to, we really haven't accepted any data from a front end. We have accepted data in the URL, okay, but it's actually kind of strange. Express, out of the box, does not allow data to come across from a client in the form of from a post. So you actually have to write this little bit of what you would call boilerplate code up here. This is considered middleware. Allow form data. And this is going to be app.use. Okay. Express, there's a method here called URL encoded extended to true. So again, this is just what I would consider boilerplate data that enables this your Express app to accept data from a client coming from the body of the form. Okay, we haven't had to do that yet, so I haven't had to write this little line of code to allow form data. Okay, and notice I kind of did that up at the top right after I declared my Express app. Okay, the thing to remember here, app.use installs middleware kind of globally. So it just kind of enables this on the Express app globally. So again, boilerplate, app.use. When you see app.use, I want you to think middleware. Let's kind of go back down here and write, instead of app.get, I'm going to choose app.put. And the route is going to be actually the same route, /book/ID. But notice these are different methods, right? So this is going to be our update route. This is going to be our read route, which is getting a book by the ID. So just like we did on our prior route, we're going to get the ID from the variable, from the params object. Const ID, params ID. Okay, for this line to work, for this line to work, it says you have to have the body parser, which is essentially what this is. Okay, so notice here we're reading data from params. Notice here we're reading from a body object, from rec.body. So you want to read something out of the URL, it's rec.params. You want to read something from a form field. You want to read something from a form field, you're going to do rec.body. And for right now, I'm just going to do res.json updated book. And this is going to be kind of where we start. Okay, so we're going to pass in a book ID. We're not even really using this yet. We're just going to make sure that our rec.body can read the updated book and send back an updated book. Now to test this, we're going to go back to Postman. And I'm going to make a new request. So click on the 3 ellipsis button here and add a request. The biggest mistake that I do, and that I think a lot of people do, is they forget to change the type. Right? This is a put request. We determined it was a put request by this right here. So this is an HTTP. These are all considered HTTP methods. All right, we touched on these briefly, but we can use the put method to perform an update. So let's just do HTTP localhost 3003 /book/1. Okay, now notice right here all these little tabs. Everyone sees my mouse? Where these tabs are. In order to send data as if it's coming from a web form, we're going to click on body. And then you have to click on form URL encoded. That word kind of seems familiar because we coded that in that middleware line. Okay? And so this is where we're going to put our book information. Like we're updating a book. Maybe we're going to update the book title. So I'm going to type in the word title in the key, and this will be Lord of the Rings. And then another field will be author, and help me out here. Tolkien. JRRTOLKEN. Okay, now as of right now, I'm just sending these 2 fields across. And let's see what happens. If I click send, I get that data back. Okay, in the form of an object. Now don't do this. Don't do what I'm about to do, but I'm just going to take out this little line of code that I said was boilerplate. If I take that out, I believe this is going to, right, see that? That no longer works. Right? So I want you to imagine here that we've mocked up a web page to allow us to update a book, right? And we update these 2 fields, and we click on send. Now I'm going to undo that change. I'm going to bring that back in. Okay? So now these are the 2 fields that I want to update of my book. So the process is going to be, let's get the book by the ID, so we got our book object, and then based on the fields that we have, let's update the fields, and then let's update our object. So update's probably the hardest one. Let's go back down here. So we've got, so the rec.body is an object, and we just put that object into a variable called updated book, and so we've kind of got that coming across and working. Let's do like we did last time, and let's read the current book. Const okay, so this is the same kind of thing that we did before. Okay, so here's what we got. We got a current book that's being read from our array. And we've got another object called updated book that might have some fields that need to overwrite the fields in current book. Okay, so I'm going to write a little bit of logic here that says, hey, if current book is found, if current book is truthy, I'm going to loop and look at the keys in updated book. Let's see if this is what I want. I think this should work. So we're going to loop through the keys in the updated book, which, keep in mind, the keys are on the left here. These are the keys, title and author. Okay, so we're looping through the keys in the updated book. Now let's see, if the current book's key, if current book sub title, if the current book's title does not match updated book's title, then we assign the current book's title equal to the updated book's title. And I'm just going to refactor this. I'm just going to call this book. I'm going to actually, because I got everyone following along, I won't do that. I'll just keep it current book.
Could you describe what it's doing again? So.
Yeah, sure. So here we're looping through the keys of our updated book, which in this case there are two, right? The keys in our updated book are title and author. Okay, so we're looping through our object. You know, because this is not a traditional for loop. This is a for in loop. Remember, for in allows us to loop through the object properties. Right, so I guess that's where I would start my comprehension, is this is not a normal for loop. This is a for in loop, right? Remember for in? Let's go back to MDN for in. For those who don't remember for in, right, allows us to loop through our properties of an object. So we're looping through our properties, or our keys, as you would say. And you say, hey, if the current book's title is not equal to the updated book's title, then update the current book's title if they're not equal. In other words, if there's an update. So current book then needs to be saved back into our array, right? So that's the last piece. We've updated, we read the data out of the array, we updated that book, now we got to save that back into an array. So that's the last piece. And the way that we'll do this is we'll just find the index, save the current book back into the array. And we'll start by reading the index. Ooh.
Should you put that inside the if statement so it doesn't run if it doesn't have a book to save it to?
That's not a bad idea. So if current book is not found, we're only going to do this update inside of the if statement. So let's do that inside of the if. Okay, so get the position of the book by the index. If the index not equal to -1, book sub index is current book. And we'll send back a success message, res dot status 200 dot send book ID updated. Okay, wrote a lot of code, so kind of expect something to break, but let's give it a shot. So let's kind of just take a look at our first book, right? The first book is called Country Bears. Okay, it has an ID of 1. So we're going to change Country Bears into Lord of the Rings. Oh, the Country Bears. Okay, so we can kind of go back here. If we go to get all books, we get the Country Bears. If I go to get book by ID and I say the ID of 1, we get Country Bears. Okay, now here we're going to update book 1 and author. And imagine if I go back to get the book by ID, there is an author. So we're going to update both the title and the author. The date, the genre, and the ID should remain the same. Let's click on, okay, we get the response back, book 1 updated. Let's go back to get book by ID now, and bingo, we updated those fields. Okay, now this is running in RAM. This data does not persist. If I reboot my server, book 1 goes back to what the seed data is, right? Make sense? Right? That's the problem with just storing the data in the array. We're not persisting the data. Okay, so I'm going to save this request as update book by ID. And if I again, we're working with here, let's change the genre. And adventure. Click send. And if I go back to get book by ID, we got adventure genre. Yeah, this is pretty cool. So I'm going to come around, and what I'd like to see is that you have an updated book by ID. Okay? Check on everyone's status. Let's add one more thing. Because like we did last time, this is very similar. Here, if you can't find the book, if current book is falsy, okay, notice where this if statement ends. Let's add an else block. We're going to do a res.status 404.send book ID not found. Okay, now you might have noticed, right, if you don't send, this is actually a problem that a student already here had. If your server doesn't send a response, your postman will hang. Okay, in other words, your postman will just spin as if a browser is spinning. You know, it doesn't go anywhere. So in the event that a book ID wasn't found, we would not have sent a response, and postman or the front end would just hang and spin. Right? You guys are all programmers, so you kind of know what an infinite loop does. Like it just spins infinitely, right? And it causes that to break. So we need to send a response in a good condition or in a bad condition. So this if else, we need to send a response here, and we need to send a response here. It's also important that you're only sending one response. You're not sending 2 responses. You can only send 1 response from the server. Our update is working. Update is kind of the harder one because it's multi-step, right? You got to look up the book by the parameter, You got to read the update. You got to loop through all the updates. And hey, if it's not equal to the current book's value, then update the current book, and then you got to save the current book back into the array. So it's a few steps there. Here on the left hand side, you can kind of collapse these routes and condense these on the left. So I'm going to start doing that, collapsing these routes, because it's starting to be a lot, right? I can collapse this and just try and minimize that. Now, keep in mind what we said yesterday, that your static routes have to go above your routes with parameters. So that's just something to keep in mind as we go through. Notice all of our parameter routes are kind of towards the bottom. And if the URLs match, notice they just have to be on different methods. So /book/ID, that matches, but they're all on different methods, so there's no conflict. So what do we want to do next? We've got read, we've got update, create. Let's do create, right? We're going to add a new book. Add a new book to the array. App.post. And sure. So what is the URL? Maybe new /books/new, or maybe /add. And so like we did before, we'll read the book from the body object. So we'll say const new book equals rec.body. And we'll just start by responding with that. Res dot status 200. There is a JSON new book. So we're just gonna, send some data over, save it in an object, and then send that object back with a status of 200. Clearly there's more to it, but this is just, one step at a time. Let's test it. We're gonna go to Postman. Again, you can start closing these things. It's important to save them, okay? It's important to save them to a collection, but, as you're not using them, let's close them down. On Retro Amazon, let's add a request, and right away we're going to change the method to post. Again, very common mistake is to forget to change the HTTP method. This is going to be http://3003, what is it, /book/new, I believe is what the route is that we coded. /books plural add. Add. And we're going to be sending data in via the body, so on these tabs. Again, anytime we're clicking this body tab, it is mimicking a web page web form. That's what we're mimicking here, right? We're adding a web page with a form. The user could say, add the book. Okay, and we click on this radio button that says form URL encoded, and I'll call this title, my new book. Click on author, Evan Gudmested. Click on genre. adventure. What are the other fields that we have? Let's scroll up to our here. Publication underscore date. Publication date is today, 9/8/2023. And you're gonna notice we gotta add a new ID. We wanna kind of maybe just do that. We're not gonna let the user add the ID. We're gonna do that on the back end. But let's just kind of hit this route and we should get our data back at this point. Okay, so we're gonna just read the length of our array and add one to it, and that's gonna be our new ID. That's easy enough, right? So we're getting the data in an object on our route. So let me kind of go back here, collapse this, go back to my route. So here we're getting the data from the rec.body, and let's add a unique ID. I'm not going to add that, so I'm going to say const ID is the book length .1. I'm going to say new book dot underscore ID is the ID. Okay, and now we're going to send that back. So we're going to kind of manually add an ID on the back end. Obviously, we don't want the user to add the ID. Okay, so if I kind of reboot this, and I notice I'm going to hit save, it's going to reboot my server. And if I click on add and I just run this again, notice I now have an ID of 6. Right, so I got the length of my array, I added 1 to the length. Obviously there's 5 books. The last ID was 5. We're adding 1 to that, the ID is now 6. Okay, how do I add a new object to an array? What is the method to get this new book onto my array of books? Sorry? Add a new book. Push. So we're going to say books dot push new book. Add the book to the array. And here I'm just going to send back a message, a little JSON, book, and I'll say, how about new book title, book added. Now this is on a success. I also want to consider a failure. Where would this fail? Right now, there's not many points of failure. Maybe I'll just do this. I'll wrap all of this in an if statement. I'll say if new book, then do all of this. Else res.status. Now this is probably, I'm just going to send back a 400, which just kind of means like the client didn't give me the data needed. And just let's say error in adding book. I don't think we're going to hit this error message, but put a little something in there. I don't think we're going to hit it. Because even if rec.body is an empty object would return new, would return true. An empty object here would return true and whatever. So if new book is not empty. So how do you check for an empty object? If new book is not empty object. If kind of, one second here. Okay, I mean there's a way of doing that, but let's just keep it simple for now. So here, let's go back to our request. Let's add the new book. It says book, my new book added. And if I go back to get all books and I click send and I scroll down, I can see my new book is now, my new book is now ID 6. Right? And so I should be able to go here, for example, and update ID book 6 and change the title from my new book to Lord of the Rings. Click on send, book 6 updated. And if I go back to get all books and scroll down, my new book has changed its title from my new book to Lord of the Rings. Right? So you can see I'm adding data to an array and then I'm manipulating the data in the array. Kind of live as we go. Okay, got asked a good question. I just figured I'd answer it to the question. Notice here I started sending back JSON versus just the send message. Notice send here I put an object. It is very common format to send across JSON, right? So as we continue to build these out, I'm not going to use the send message anymore. I'm going to transition to the JSON method, because backends typically respond in JSON. Okay, so send we just used in Hello World to get Hello World to send a message across. But most of the time, your backends are responding with JSON, right? So Connor, is that good? Good answer? Acceptable answer? I passed the quiz. Moving on. What do we got left? We got delete. Thankfully, so new on a new book I put a post, on an update I put a put. Let's do a delete, and thankfully there's a HTTP app.delete. And we're going to delete a book by its ID. We're going to send into this request and a response object. Sorry, Drew.
Sometimes it gets it right.
Well, sometimes it gets it right. Now, here's the thing. Let's explain it. Let's explain it. What does this line do? Gets the ID from the URL. Now this is not right. We're not. Oh yeah, it is. Here's reading the index, like the position in the array. I would change this to a find, not find index. And I would change this to the... No, we're going to do find index. Yep, find index. Find the index of the book in the array. Remember, this returns -1 if it's not found. So if it's not -1, we do a splice another array method, right? To remove an item, we can run this splice method. And the way it works, the first argument that you pass is the index that you want to remove. The second argument is how many elements do you want to remove. So this is going to say, hey, index number 1, remove one item, or index number 2, remove one item, or index number 3, remove one item. So the splice method takes 2 arguments. The first argument is an index of like, hey, starting at what index, what do you want to remove? And then how many elements do you want to remove is the second argument. The thing that you'll notice about Copilot is the more code you write, it picks up on your style, right? It picks up on your style, how you've coded so far in this file. We've got 95 lines of code. It's kind of picking up our style, our coding style. Yeah, Connor.
Why is it that sometimes people write, even with this instance of the 2 seconds, sometimes they put message and sometimes they don't?
Yeah, so I'm gonna send back JSON, kind of like I mentioned. Well, again, it's just how you want to send the data. You could easily send the message like such.
But is it better to do with?
It is completely customizable. It is however you want to send the data back and forth. This is an object. This object has a key of message and a value of book ID deleted. Okay, now let's spin this up in Postman. Okay, I'm gonna kind of close my update because I know my update's working. This post, notice it's still called new request. I'm gonna say add new book. Right, so it's named properly. Get book by ID. I'm just gonna close it all down. I can open them back up as needed. You just tend to get all these things open up there. And if you're like me, I'm the kind I don't do well with 100 tabs. I do well with like 1 tab. So in Retro Amazon, I'm going to add a request. This is going to be a delete http://localhost 3003 /book/1. We're going to delete book 1. And it says book 1 deleted. Now if I go back to get all books, you can notice my ID of 1 is gone, right? It was there until I deleted it. If I go back to delete 11, it says book 11 not found. If I go back to delete book 2, and then that should go away. If I send that again, we now have removed book 2. All right, although the bulk of the CRUD work is done, there's a few more things that I would do to this that you guys haven't seen yet. So a few more new topics. One of which I've kind of alluded to, which is you really don't want all of these routes inside of your server.js. I mean, these are just our first routes, but we're going to end up with many, many more routes. And so it is very common to kind of extract those out of that JavaScript file. And because we can kind of import and export and move code around, that's pretty common. So the first thing I want to do is extract these routes into a separate file. And that means over here, we're going to be creating a new file for those routes. Bless you. And so let's go ahead and create a folder called routes. trying to think if I want another folder under here. I don't know. Trying to think. It's because I've done it in the past. I'm going to make another subfolder under routes called API. And this API folder is basically these are the routes that will belong to your back end, right? That can be called by your front end, right? So we're making these kind of public facing routes. So a routes folder, and then underneath that API. Now you're going to notice it now says /routes/API inside of Visual Studio. And so I'm going to create a file here inside of this API folder, right? So I'm going to click on this new file, but notice how this is highlighted, routes API. Click on new file. I'm just going to call this book.js. Okay, and it puts it inside of this routes API folder. Now, what we wind up doing, and this is how I think of it, it might not be the most technically accurate way of thinking of it, but we kind of spin up another Express server, but like a minified version of it, right? So just as we did on server.js, what we're going to make here is called a router. Okay, and it's, again, I think of a router as a minified Express server. So let me kind of, just like we did before, import Express from Express. And then last time we did const app equals Express. This is what we did last time. Okay, we're not doing that this time. This time, we're just going to call this router. And now notice we're calling express.router. So again, think of a router as a minified Express server. And at the bottom of the file, we are going to export that router. So export router as, I'm going to call it book router. So that's how I would start off this file. And this is basically going to allow me to take my book routes and put them over here. Okay. So since we're exporting this variable, notice we're exporting this variable, we're calling it book router. We need to import that now on server. So we kind of come back over here. And I'm going to import book router from, and notice it kind of gives me the path. We need to add the .js, book.js. Okay, one step at a time. Now we need to use this book router. So I'm going to say app.use. This is middleware. And this is part of our path. /API / let's just do /books book router, okay? Semicolon. So now we're going to have to change our paths because we were doing different, like some of these were plural, some of these were singular. Okay, now they're all of our routes are now going to be found under /API/books.
Do you have to put routes as the file path?
Actually, do I have to put what?
Routes in front of API on the file path?
No, because it actually knows that here.
Okay.
Because we have the routes, we have that to the file there. So now all of our back-end calls are going to be found under API books. Okay, and so we're going to kind of refactor these routes to all be under here. So now this might be, instead of /books, we're just going to call it /list. Okay, so let's start by just bringing the books over. Okay, so I'm going to take my books, cut, and paste right here. Okay, so I kind of move the books over because these are going to be needed by our route, so I had to move all of my books over. Okay, and I'm just going to kind of start with get all books. So what we're going to do is you basically append these two together. So this is going to be /API/books. I'm going to change this to be /list. Okay, so I'm going to cut this next one, which was get all books. I'm going to cut get all books. And I'm going to paste right here. And I'm going to change this, instead of app.get, this is router.get. /books. Right, because it's not called app over here. Over here it's called router. And instead of calling it list, it said books, I'm going to call it list. So here's the full path. It is now /API/books/list. Notice, the / is here. There's no / at the end of book, so I add the / at the beginning of the route here.
So do we get rid of that in the server.js file?
Yeah, I cut and paste.
Okay.
Yeah, I cut and paste. I got rid of it in server, and I put it inside of book. Okay. Now, of course, I need to refactor this on my. Let me call this delete book, and save it and close it. So now my get all books is now at a different URL, right? So what is the URL? I'm going to invite you to follow me. API/books/list. Right? You got to follow the trail here. /API/books/list. So if I do this correctly, /API/books/list. And if I got that wired up properly, it will work, and it does look like it's working. Okay, so my get all books is now at a different back-end route, right? I just kind of changed that while I was refactoring it. So I can kind of save my request, so it's now at this route. Okay, so I'm going to come around and make sure you guys can still get all your books. And let me show, what do you guys need to see? If anything?
Can you go to the book.js?
Right here. So as you might have guessed, we're going to check each one of these out one at a time. So this is /book/ID. Again, API books. I'm just going to kind of cut this, get the book by ID. I'm going to cut it. I'm going to paste it over here. I'm going to change it from app.get to router.get. And I'm just going to do /ID. So now the full path is /API/books/ID to get a book by the ID. So let's check that out. So we got get all books. Let's get book by ID /API/books/1. We can get a book by the ID now. and I'm going to save that request. And as I fix these, I'm just going to close them. So the initial setup is probably, you know, the most work, and then after that it's just refactoring a few things. So here's our update book by ID. I'm going to cut. And I'll paste it over here. This goes from app.put to router.put. And I'll do put by the ID. This is the only put that we have, so there's not going to be any conflicts. So router.put. So let's think about how we're going to update book by ID. This is now /API/books/1. And I'm going to change the title of my first book to Lord of the Rings. If I go to get all books now, I get Lord of the Rings. So my update is refactored. Okay, on to the next. We're going to add a new book. We're going to cut. Paste app.post to router.post. This is just going to be /add. So add a new book /API/books/add. My new book added. And if I go to get all books, there's my new book. If I click it again, I've got ID of 6, ID of 7. Bless you. Bless you. So we've got add working. Last but not least, we've got delete. So let's take delete over, router.delete. We're going to delete by the ID. And refactor the URL to API/books/ we'll delete book number 2. Book 2 deleted, and book 2 is gone. Okay, so you can kind of see that really cleans up our server.js. All that's left is kind of a home route. Yeah, so update book by ID is API/books and then just the ID.
And the delete is API, the add is API post/add.
The add is a post add new book /API/books/add. Okay, so cool. So that's nice. I mean, it's not super hard to do that. The important thing to remember is that as you start having these different files with these things called a router, you have to add these pieces together. So again here, we're defining the first part of the path right here, /API/books. And notice there's no slash at the end of books here because, you know, I'm adding it right here, /list. So again, these are like string concatenations, right? You're adding these two strings together to give you the path to that route. And that's the important thing to remember there. And now that we are starting to have multiple files, I want to introduce something that I started to introduce the other day. Let me open up a new tab here. And come on, okay. npm.js, we're going to install another dependency. Just called debug. Debug is a debugging utility for Node. The command to install is npm I debug. So let's go ahead and stop our servers from running. So notice my server is running here. If you hit Control C, terminate the batch job, I'm going to say yes. And I'm going to type in npm I debug. I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to install a new dependency. Now if I go into my package JSON, you can see that I now have Express dependency and I have debug. Yesterday I described debug as an evolution of console log. This is kind of an upgraded console log. And what is console log? It's a debugging tool. We don't have too many console logs right now. But as we need to debug, we'll add some of this in. So while we're here, let's install npm I. I'm going to show you the package like I just did. Another package is the .env. .env. .env that is a module that loads environment variables from a file into a process.env that you can access. And so this is a way to kind of work with global variables. The command npm I.env. So these are going to kind of work together. So npm I.env. And if I open up my package JSON now, let me close those down, package JSON, I now have .env and I've got debug all up and running. There's a few steps to get these debugs working, so let's close that down and take some steps. I guess the first step is we'll create the .env file. I don't want to create it inside of Routes API. Okay, I want this to be in my root, right? So don't accidentally, like I just did, kind of have that highlighted and create it in the wrong spot. In fact, it's even better, maybe just right click in this empty space and set new file right here, .env. And so I can expand and collapse this, and you'll notice .env is not in that folder, right? It's always there.
So no file name, just the extension.
Yeah, no file name, just a file extension. It's a unique file in that way. There's a few other things like that, like getignore, .getignore. It's a special file. So I'm going to make this debug variable equal to app :*. So this is, again, just what's needed to kind of get this debug utility up and running. Let's open up our package JSON. Now that I've got that .m file, I'm going to run my nodemon command. And I want nodemon to basically recognize my .env file. So there's a little switch here that says, hey, when you run nodemon, go ahead and recognize the .env file. So now when I run start dev, it runs nodemon with this extra switch that plays nice with .env. Okay, so, kind of step one, install the dependencies. Step two, create this env file with a variable in it. Step three, modify your nodemon script to recognize the .env file. Now let's open up our server.js. And we are going to have a few imports here. All right, we're bringing in a .env, and we're going to run a .env.config. All right, now we're going to create a debug channel called app server. And so when you have these debugs, you have these different channels, and these channels basically let you know, color coordinated and by a name, where you're running this debug command. So I'm going to say const debug I'll call it debug server because it's a server.js equals debug app server. So basically all of this gives us a method. That method is going to be called debug server, and this allows me to here say debug server, and you give it a little message. So this debug server, this variable that we're creating right here, is a method. It allows us to say hello from Amazon.com, hello from the upgraded console log. That's what I'm going to say. Hello from the upgraded console log. So whenever I hit my default route, I should get this console message in the terminal that says hello from the upgraded console log. What'd I forget? Hello from. Cool. So now we got to run nodemon. So how do we run nodemon? npm run start dev. Let's see if this works. Now it says debug is not defined. Oh, I gotta bring in debug. Sorry, one more import. One more import. I forgot this line right here. Import debug from debug. There we go. Now if I kind of go to the home route, if it's working, you get this little color coded console log. Hello from the upgraded console log. It is magenta. Now this is a channel. This is a channel basically saying, hey, this is from the server file. You could say it says app:server, so you know it's coming from the server file. Now, I don't know. Maybe if I put .js, let's do that. And really, if you wanted it to, now it's a different color. It says app server.js, right? So it's telling you what file it's in by right here by naming it server.js. Let's make another channel, right? Where else could we put a channel? Well, the only other file is over here. So now let's import debug from debug. That's good. Now we have a channel called app:book.js. This variable is now called debug book. Now from here, when I go to my list route, I'm going to say debug book. I'm going to say getting all the books. So of course, if I hit my home route, I get hello from the upgraded console log, and I can see that's from server.js. But if I go back to Postman and I get all my books, of course I get my books back, but I should also say, I should see another getting all the books. Now normally these are different colors, so I find that funny that they're not different colors. I'm just going to call it, maybe I'm going to take the .js. I don't think that's going to make a difference. Okay, now it's a different color. So let me here, and if I go here, it's a different color. I don't know why mine were the same color. I mean, whatever. The important thing is it tells you the file, in this case book.js. It tells you basically where the console log is happening from. Getting all the books. I'm wondering if because they both have a .js, if it's giving me a certain color. Right? So you could just leave the .js off and also leave the .js off here. If I go to list all the books, I get yellow. If I go to my home route, I get pink.
I'm not getting the
Sure. So I'm just forewarning you guys that this is a very helpful tool, and why I don't know why it's a warning. It's a warning because you want to get it working. Because if you don't get it working, you're gonna. It's just a very helpful tool to debug later on. So you're gonna have a harder time debugging. Now that we have an upgraded console log, well, why do we need console log anymore? Here on our app.listen. Let's do debug server. Debug server, right? And now when I boot it up, now we get an app server that says server is listening, right? So I actually get a count, again, the upgraded console log. And I can use this debugging technique moving forward. It's also fairly common to store your port in an environment variable. So here's what that looks like. Let's go in here. For whatever reason, environment, they're always capital. Port equals, and I'm just going to change it. Well, I'll keep it 3003. Bless you. No semicolon. Notice if I put a semicolon there, I'm going to say port 3003. And so I'm kind of storing my port in this environment variable. That allows me back here, I'm going to say const port equals process.env.port. Now notice you can say or, if it doesn't read it, just assign it to port 3003. You could do an or, I don't know, 3005, like just to show that it's different. And then now I can, instead of hard coding the port, I can use that variable, right? And that'll essentially, you can see it's working. I'm still on port 3003. So it's reading from my environment variable the port number, which is, I would just say, something that I see a lot. Yeah.
Sorry, why did you put the and 3005?
Or. So this, yeah, this is a good question, right? So this is one of those short-circuiting syntaxes. Okay, so here we're creating a variable called port, and it says if this returns true, then assign it to port. Otherwise, assign it the value of 3005. Right? So it's kind of like a short-circuiting. If it's true, then put it there. Otherwise, it's like an if-else operation. just a shorthand syntax. Yeah, so that made a good observation. Here, instead of statically coding this, we can go like such, port. Right, so now this is dynamic, so the link that we get here is dynamic, as opposed to statically configured. Right now, like if I were to do something like this, actually, that's funny that it's saying book list not found because it's being read as a variable. But let's just maybe make something up. Blah. Says cannot get blah. One second here. Okay, so right now when I say, I make up this path, right, I try and hit an endpoint, I just get this error message that says cannot get. We could provide maybe a more friendly message, and so we can do a little bit of error handling, if you will. Let's kind of go up after we declare app. Here's kind of where we're working with middleware, right? So we got app.use this and app.use that. Let's do an So I'm trying to very simply just send a status message of 404 that says not found. Let's see, if we hit that, you can see this kind of handles page not found or route not found. And you could even change this to send back like some JSON. Here we'll send back an error, :backticks. Sorry, couldn't find. And rec.original URL. See if I can't get these. I'm missing a backtick right here. And oh, let me get my curlies lining up.
You can put it in front of your parentheses.
Could I? Okay, so now we're just sending, sorry, can't find. Sorry, can't find /blah. Right. So suffice to say, you know, clients are going to request all sorts of URLs, and now we're giving back a more specific error message. And I also want to handle server exceptions. App.use, and this is going to keep my server from crashing. You know, I don't want my server to crash in the event that there's a problem. You know, what I'll do is if there's ever a problem, it'll basically bubble up to right here and send back some JSON saying some detailed information. Yes.
The couldn't find URL one.
Uh-huh.
It screws up everything else. If you would try using one of the other valid ones.
Okay, so what you're saying is if I go to get all books, well, let me
Yeah, even the just blank
slash
screws up.
API slash books. Did I screw something up here? Nope.
Mine's messed up when I just do the 3003.
Yes, it says it throws the error every time you open anything.
Mine's not.
What's different?
Are you putting it after your router here?
Does it have to be at like the end of the code?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so notice the order here. I think maybe what's happening is your probably have these lines of code above, like this line of code would be my guess.
So like probably should put it right above the app.listen.
Yeah.
So everything else runs first.
Yeah. Okay, so here's what I'll do. I'm gonna cut these two that I just made, and I'm gonna put it just above here. Okay, 'cause I think some people were getting all their routes entangled because it wasn't recognizing the routes first. Here you got to recognize the routes first, and then if it's not found, then you kind of run this line of code. Right? Good.
Could you scroll down to that?
Okay, we did a whole lot on this one. All right, I'm going to stop the recording there.